Okay, we're up to Daf Nun Gimel Amid Aleph. We're about 6 lines into the page. By Rav Ashi, we're discussing the treifa called drusa, which is that if an animal claws another animal, there's some sort of poison that comes out in the claws. So they're going into details. By Rav Ashi, the Gemara Sakasha, Shar Oifis Tmein Yesh Lan Drusa Ein Lahem Drusa. Does the average non-kosher bird? The Mishnah mentions a nates and a gas, whatever they are. Those, the Mishnah says, can definitely harm another animal to create a drusa. What about other non-kosher birds? Stam non-kosher birds, a vulture, a hawk, an eagle, whatever. Non-kosher birds, are non-kosher birds able to make a drusa? So says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Hill or Rav Ashi. So Rav Hill says to Rav Ashi, yes, all non-kosher birds that have talons that are able to claw are able to kill and kill other birds. So says the Gemara, so if non-kosher birds, all non-kosher birds are capable of making a drusa, then why does the Mishnah mention nates and gas? So why does the Mishnah specify a nates and a gas if all non-kosher animals are capable of making a drusa? What's the distinction? So the Gemara says like this, all non-kosher birds are capable of making a drusa. That's not a shayla. So why does the Mishnah specify a nates and a gas? So the Gemara says, I don't know, it's about 15 lines. The first line of the word is ba'if. It's about 15 lines into the page. So it says the Gemara, Drusas hanetz b'kavase v'inach b'dezutra minayu. A nates is different than other non-kosher birds. All non-kosher birds are capable of making a drusa. The difference is a nates is able to harm an animal of its own size, a bird of its own size. So let's say a nates is 20 pounds. It's able to kill a bird that's 20 pounds. Other non-kosher birds can cause a drusa, but only of birds smaller than their size. And I don't know. I think I heard hawk. I don't know. Says the Gemara of Ikad Amri. Some have a different version. Drusas hanates b'derabi minau. That a nates is able to kill a bird larger than itself. Ve'inach b'dekavasayu. And all other non-kosher birds can make a drusa, but only of animals, birds their size and smaller. So it's a slightly different version. Amar of Kahana Mishmei Rav Shimi Barashi. Ein drusa l'shuol. A fox is not able to make an animal a drusa. A fox does not have the type of poison that would make a drusa. Eini, is this true? A fox can't. V'aki aser Rav Dimi Amar. Didn't Rav Dimi once say, Ma'isa v'dara shuol rachel b'merchat shel beis hini? There was a fox that clawed a sheep in beis hini. Uba ma'isa l'pnei chacham v'ami yesh drusa. And the chacham said there was a drusa. So you told me a fox is not able to be doiris, does not have enough venom to cause this problem. But wasn't there a ma'isa where they said that it was a fox and they said there is drusa? So is there or is there not? So the Gemara says you got the story wrong. Rav Safra ahi chatul haba. That story was not a fox where they said it's a drusa. It was a puma. It was a cat. So it wasn't a fox. Fox do not have the type of poison that's able to make a drusa. No, it's not. It's not puncturing anything. It's scratching and then inflicting poison in the body. Yeah. Says the Gemara, Ikadamri, some have a different version of what happened. Amrav Kana Mishri Rav Shimi Barashi, Yesh Drusa L'Shul. According to this version, that Rav Shimi Barashi said there is a drusa for a fox. Eini, is this true? V'akiyasar of Dimi Amar, Ma'isa v'dar sha'al shuol rachel b'merchat shablisini. According to this version, he says there is drusa by a fox. The shaila was that there was a Ma'isa where a fox was doiris, a sheep in Beis Hini, uba ma'isa v'chamar ein drusa. And according to their version, they said there's no drusa. So it's the question, you said there's a drusa, but the ma'isa was that they said there's no drusa. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Safar hu kal v'haber. You got the story wrong. It wasn't a fox. Really a fox, yesh drusa. That story where they said ein drusa was a dog. And there's no drusa by a dog. Amrav Yosef, Naktina ein drusa l'kalef. There is no drusa by a dog. So if a dog scratches an animal, it will not create a durs. Again, the main point about drusa is that it's not puncturing anything. So obviously, if it punctures something, I don't care what punctures. It could be a claw, it could be a needle. We're talking about a case where the animal scratches, let's say, the chest. And the presumption is that there will be poison that will penetrate the chest and go all the way into the lungs. That's the issue. Rabbi and Naktinon, some rules. And again, this is all based on poison, which we don't really know the mitzvahs of anymore. Rabbi and Naktinon, ein drusel biyad. It has to be the hand of the animal, not the leg of the animal. Lafuke regel deloy. Ein drusel b'tziporin. Lafuke shein deloy. There's only drusa by the nails, not by the teeth. Ein drusel midas. And there's no only drusa midas. What does that mean? The animal has to actively claw the other animal. Let's say a lion falls off of a building and happens to land on a sheep. it doesn't intend to, it's just mamish happenstance, that's not going to be a drusa. It has to be intentional attack. That's where it inflicts venom. Okay. And ein drusa el michayim lafuga achar misa deloy. And the last rule is there's no drusa achar misa. Now what that sounds like is that if an animal that's dead, you take its claw and you scratch someone with it, there's no drusa. Here's the obvious question. You told me that there's only drusa midas, which means that the animal has to have das. If the animal does it accidentally, it's not drusa. Now you have to tell me if the animal's dead. How about if the animal's dead? If the animal's dead, there's definitely no das. If you tell me that you need das, that excludes a dead animal legamri. So why do you have to tell me that ain't drusa lachar misa? It's pasha there's no drusa lachar misa. Amri hasha shalei midas amrit loy lachar misa mi boy. It's a pella. So says the Gemara, leitzricha de daris who paskid liyadek. The case is as follows. When it says la'achar misa, there's no drusa, it's not talking about where the animal died. Of course, if the animal died, there's no drusa. The animal needs das. Here's the case. The animal sticks its claws into the sheep, and then you cut off the animal's arm. So the arm is dead. The halacha is there's no drusa, meaning the drusa happens when it pulls the hand out. And it needs das when it pulls the hand out. So the animal's alive. You might think that because it started clawing me das, that's considered drusa. Kamash malan, if the hand is dead, i.e. you cut off the hand, so the hand is now a severed arm, it won't cause drusa because the real venom is inflicted when it pulls out. And when it pulls out, it was already severed from the arm. Says the Gemara, you might think that it inflicts poison when it puts the hand into the sheep. Kamash malan bahadi shalif shadizara. Kamash malan, the poison is actually given when it pulls out. And when it pulls out, the animal's already dead. The arm was already severed. And therefore it's considered shalei midas. Which part? It stuck the hand in midas, but then you cut the hand off. And then you took it off. No, the venom is inflicted when it pulls the hand out. And to pull the hand out, you need das. Says the Gemara, Amarav Barchan Urkanam Arahun Amarav, Ari Shenichlas Lebein Hashvarim, V'nimtza Siparim Begav Vishalechem Mehem. You have a lion that enters the pen of the ox, and all of a sudden you don't know what happens, but when the ox leaves, there's a claw in its back. Says the Gemara, Ein Chaysh Hashem Darse. That's not Daras. Why? So you'll say, it kind of sounds like it's Daras. There's a claw in its back. So it says, no, not the arm. I guess a paw. I guess a part of the paw. I guess maybe the giant nail. Maybe a part of the finger. Whatever it is. So something is in the back. So says the Gemara. That's not a drusa. Why not? So I'll say it outside. We'll see it inside. It's very simple. That it's statistically very rare when an animal. Lions do attack, let's say, ox, but when they do, their fingers, their nails don't come off, and therefore it's more likely what happened was the lion was scratching the wall. The nail came off in the wall, and the ox was rubbing its back against the wall and got it in there. Because it's more likely, statistically, when lions attack ox, the fingers, the nails don't pop off, and therefore, mistama, what happened was the nail popped off when a lion was scratching against the wall. The ox rubbed its back against the wall and it went in, but it didn't go midas, and therefore it's not considered drusa.
When we see the same thing, like a tiny animal that you would think that lion might actually go and eat.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing. The point is, it's unlikely in the act of drusa for the paw of the lion, for something of the lion's hand to get detached is very rare. And therefore, it's more likely what happened was, it got detached because the lion got in a fight, whatever it was, it got stuck in the wall, and the ox just rubbed its back into it. Says the Gemara, my time. While it's true that the majority of lions claw, but when they do this, the nail doesn't come off. The claw doesn't come off. And the fact that this ox has a nail in its back, it's more likely that it rubbed up against the wall and there was a detached nail of a claw of the lion in the wall. Says the Gemara, Adarab, I think it's the opposite. How often does an ox rub it back and all of a sudden gets a claw in its back? I think it's more likely a lion inflicted it. The fact that it has a claw in its back indicates that it's more likely it was done by a lion. So says the Gemara, you know what? It's a suffix what happened. The halacha is, according to this opinion, they'll say it's a machlekes, but according to Rav, it's a machlekes, Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, if there's a suffix, whether it was dairis or not, suffix lekula. Why? Because we have a chezkas kashrus. which means the animals have a chazaka that they're healthy. You want to make it that it was clawed? If there's a possibility it wasn't, suffix claw lakula. That's what he says. So uki milcha ascheske, go with its chazaka, which is that it was a healthy animal. Havale suffix drusa, the Rav l'tameh. This is Rav l'shitasa. Damer ein chayshel suffix drusa. Rav shita is that anytime there's a suffix drusa, we're makels. We'll see in a moment. Rabbi. Abaya says this concept that if there's a nail in the back of the ox, we're lenient. First of all, this is pashut, that this is only true if there's an actual nail. But if there's scratch marks, obviously, then scratch marks are not. That's a problem. And says the Gemara Vayter, that also it's only a problem. Why is it that we're makel according to Rav when there's a nail in the back of the ox? Because it's unlikely that a lion's nail would come off when it was scratching an ox. But says the Gemara, if the nail is dry, then it's a problem. Why? Because dry nails disconnect easily. So if the nail is dry from the lion's claw, nail, whatever you want to call it, that is dry, so then it's very possible it'll pop off. Talon for a lion. I don't think that's what it's called, but I'll go with that. So the point is, I think it's claws. I think that's what they're called. The point is, the claw of the lion, if it's dry, then it's likely that it popped off. So then it's not a shaila. So then it's very, very likely. In additionally, the lechanami, even if the claw is not dry, it's moist. So we said moist lion's claws should not pop off. But the Gemara says also, let's say instead of one claw, there's three of them, and they're lined up pischufe. They look like a hand, then it's for sure a problem. If you have the back of an ox that's got three claws in it and they're shaped like that, like 1, 2, 3, then that's obviously we know what happened. Itmar, we said before, Suffolk Dairis, Suffolk Ene Dairis. We said Suffolk Rav is Makel. So Gemara speaks it out. Rav Amar Eichayshel Suffolk Drusa. Rav says when there's a Suffolk whether it was Dairis or not, we're Makel. Shmuel Amar Eichayshel Suffolk Drusa. But Shmuel said we're Machmer. Now, what exactly is the case that they argue in? Says there is a situation where Rav and Shmuel argue it's a Suffolk Drusa, Suffolk whether the animal got slashed or not. Rav is lenient, Shmuel is strict. What is the case? So says the Gemara. Tukol Yama Suffolk all, Suffolk loy all, Emaloi all. If I don't know whether the lion even entered the pen, meaning in other words, according to Shmuel, we're machmer. What is the case that Shmuel's machmer that we have to do an inspection? By the way, I want to point this out. Just because the animal got clawed does not mean it's treif. It just means you have to do an inspection to make sure there's no poison on any of the internal organs. So Shmuel's strict by a case of Suffolk. What is the case? If we're not sure whether the lion entered the pen or not, we're definitely going to be lenient. Because we don't even know that the lion is there. Meaning it's not like you saw the lion go in. Maybe a lion entered the pen. Maybe not. That's Bechlal Suffolk that everyone's lenient. Suffolk kalva, Suffolk shuna. Let's say I know an animal clawed the ox, but I don't know if it was a lion or I don't know if it was a dog, then ema kalva. If I don't even know which animal did it, I know it was clawed, but I didn't see which animal, then avada we're going to be lenient because maybe it was an animal that will not cause it to be a drusa, like a dog. All shasik, let's say it's a lion, and I see the lion go in. So here's the case. All shasik, if the lion goes in but it's quiet, the Esav Benayu, and it's sitting peacefully. So you walk into the pen, and you just see the lion just chilling with the ox. Everyone seems very, very happy. The halacha is, that's also not a problem. Why? Because Ema Shalma Shavi, maybe they're getting along. Meaning, I didn't see a clawing, there was no screaming, there was no noise, the oxen weren't freaking out, the lion's just chilling. If the lion's chilling with the oxen, then I'll be lenient. Everyone should be lenient, because maybe they're obviously getting along. Caught another case. You walk in, this is interesting also, you walk into the pen, of the ox pen, and you see a lion there, and it's ripped off one of the head of the oxen. The halach is then it's also okay, if you didn't see it clawing anywhere else. Why? Because it got its anger out. Right? Why would it claw? It either claw for one or two reasons. It wants to eat, or it's angry. If it rips the head off one of the oxen, then it got everything out of its system. It could eat that ox, it clawed it out, it got it out of its system. I always say this, like when you hear just let him get it out of his system. You know what I mean? He's screaming and he's killing oxen. Just let him get it out of his system. Once you kill one ox, then you usually got it out of your system. So it says the Gemara, then he got it out of his system, then we're not concerned. So what is the machlokes? Keep going. You see the lion go in, it's roaring, and the oxen are freaking out. Everyone's screaming. The halach is that's also not a problem. Why? Until you see the slashing. Because biute kamevate. They're both frightened. Adadi. Go to the next page. Meaning that's not an indication that there's actually, that's just they're both freaking out. Both freaking out is not an indication that, because the lion would not be roaring and they wouldn't be screaming. One would be screaming and one would be running. So says the Gemara, what's the machlekes? Ki pligi diu kashasik ve'inu kimerakakin. The cases where the lion is silent and the oxen are freaking out. That's when Shmuel says, I think that's a problem. Because Shmuel argues, if they were both just freaking out, listen, when animals get near each other, it doesn't mean they're fighting, it just means they're screaming at each other, everyone's freaked out, that's not an indication. But the fact that the lion's quiet, that means the lion is attacking. Says the Gemara, Mar Savar Maisa Kavid Behu. Shmuel says the fact that the lion is silent indicates that the lion is going to slash or did slash. That's why they're freaking out, but the lion is silent. Umar Savar Machmas Biyutusu the Kavdi. And Rav says no. Who says the lion attacked? Maybe the lion didn't do anything. The oxen merely see the lion, they freak out. No indication that anything happened. Amra Meimar, what's the psak? Hilchasa, Choyshin L'Savik Drusa, we paskin that if there is a chance that it was Dairis, we are machmer, and that means you have to do an inspection of the animal. Amra Ravashi La Meimar, how dare you? How dare you? Amra Ravashi La Meimar, no, I'm joking. Amra Ravashi, by the way, I just... Yeah, I understand. Ravashi said to Meimar, Hadarav Mai. Again, Rav is Makel by a suffix drusa. Shmuel is Machmer by a suffix drusa. So Machlek is Rav and Shmuel. Now, so if you have a suffix drusa, according to Shmuel, Machmer, according to Rav, Makel. The case was, Meimar said, Hilchasa Choyshin suffix drusa. We're Machmer. Now, what does that mean? In other words, Meimar is saying we paskin like Shmuel. Because according to Rav, you could be makel by a suffix drusa. So Amar Meimar Hilchasa Choyshin l'Savik drusa. We're machmer by a suffix drusa like Shmuel. So Amar Ravashi la Meimar. So Ravashi said to Meimar, Hadarav Mai. What about Rav? Meaning, why are you skipping Rav's opinion, just going with Shmuel? Rav said makel. All of a sudden, you're skipping Rav's opinion. What about the fact that Rav is a big paisik and you have a cheskas kashrus? Meaning, why are you skipping Rav's opinion? It's an interesting question. You don't normally have this. But he's saying, I pass on like Shmuel. What about Rav? So, Amar lei, loy shmiele. I never heard of Rav's opinion. Kolaimer loy svirle. When he said he didn't hear of it, what he meant is, I don't agree. I don't agree with Rav. Why doesn't he? So the first version, he just doesn't hold like Rav. Fair. Iba is saying, or another answer. Hodabe Rav legabi de Shmuel. Meimar said, I think Rav retracted his view. Meaning, although a Rav originally was lenient by a suffix drusa, he eventually was machmer. What indication was Rav? How do we know that Rav was machmer by suffix drusa, that he was chayzer, that he retracted his view? The Gemara says, Dahu sharakpta the suffix drusais. Das lekami de Rav. They had a basket of suffix drusais, of birds that might have been clawed. Okay? They bring a basket of these birds to Rav. Now again, Rav originally was Makel. What did Rav do? Rav said, Shajin l'kami de Shmuel. He says, take it to Shmuel. Meaning, Rav said, I'm not passing to take it to Shmuel. Now stop right there. The fact that he sent it to Shmuel indicates that he was chayzer. Says the Gemara, and what did Shmuel do? These are, by the way, these are live birds. There's a basket of live birds that were apparently with a pen with a lion. So Rav originally was lenient, Shmuel was machmer. They come to Rav with these birds, expecting Rav to be lenient. Rav says, send it to Shmuel. What does Shmuel do? Shmuel is chaynik, Shmuel strangles them, v'shadinu benara, and he throws them into the river. Okay? Because he felt that it's treif. Now, why Shmuel did it that, we'll explain in a second. The point is, how do you see that Rav was chayzer? Well, because the fact that Rav was not lenient, and Rav said, send it to Shmuel, indicates that he was chayzer. Let me just speak this out. So this is a raya that Rav was chayzer. Let me ask you a question. Is it a good raya? They go to Rav with these birds, expecting him to be lenient, and Rav says, send it to Shmuel. And Shmuel strangles them. And gets them. So, it must be he was chayzer, because if he held like his original shita, he should be lenient. Let me ask you a question. Let's say he was chayzer. So he's now strict. So why doesn't he kill the birds? Why is he sending it to Shmuel b'chlal? Meaning, b'chlal, it's funny. Why is he not paskening? So they say, the fact that he wasn't paskening to be lenient means that he was chayzer. Let's say he was chayzer, so he should pasken. What's the answer? The answer is this is Shmuel's town. Rav is no indication of what his actual sheet is. Rav refused to pasken in the presence of Shmuel. He felt that it was disrespectful. So the fact that he sent it to Shmuel does not mean he was chayzer. Because it could be Hitaka held of his original shita. But he refused to pasken in Shmuel's presence. He felt that Shmuel's kehila Covered Shmuel, he didn't paskin. So the fact that he sent it to Shmuel doesn't mean he was chayzer, because if he was taka chayzer, he would have paskin that it's aser. The fact that he abstained from a psak means we don't know his opinion, because he refused to paskin in the presence of Shmuel.
If he had an inclination that, like, or an inkling that Shmuel would be like killing these things,
Doesn't matter. He still wouldn't do it.
Because to Shmuel's trade, is there any sort of idea, like you said, like Rav shouldn't have done like about hashkes?
No, because Shmuel's from Shmuel's perspective, it's not allowed to be eaten. It's not a problem. He refused to paskin in the presence of Shmuel. That would be fair. What Shmuel does is not his problem. Says the Gemara, the fact that he refused to be matir means that he was chayzer, and he holds like Shmuel. Says the Gemara, elamai hadarbe. Wait, if he retracted his view, l'srinulu. So why isn't he just saying it's aser himself? Why is he sending it to Shmuel? Ela aser de Shmuel have. It must be the case was that it was in Shmuel's location, and therefore it's not indicative that he refused to paskin because he was chayzer. Maybe he refused to paskin because it was Shmuel's location. Now, finish that story, so we don't know what Rav's opinion is. But what ended up happening, Shmuel took the box of birds, choked them, strangled them, and threw them in the river. The question is, why was that the best approach? Says the Gemara, just throw them in the river alive. They'll drown on their own, and that way Shmuel didn't have to take their life. It's never good to take an animal's life. I'm saying, so the fact that Shmuel killed the birds, throw them in the river, and they'll drown. The answer is, mefarcha misalkin. He was afraid that they would fly away. He was afraid that they would flap away, and then they would survive, and he felt that they were treif. Says the Gemara, I have another question. The halacha is that if an animal can survive 12 months, that means that they're not a treifa. So why doesn't he just keep the birds for 12 months? Tell his wife, hold on to these birds for 12 months. If they survive 12 months, then we'll eat them. Says the Gemara, it's not a good idea to keep something in your house that you're not allowed to eat for 12 months. He was afraid that if it was in his house for 12 months, someone's going to accidentally cook them for Shabbos. Says the Gemara, so sell him to a guy. Give it to a Goyim. So says the Gemara, Yisrael. He was afraid that the Goyim would sell them to Jews, would turn around and sell them to Jews. So says the Gemara, so I have one last question. I get why he had to kill them. He had no alternative. But why throw them in the river? Throw them in the trash. So says the Gemara, because Shmuel wanted to make a public statement. These are treif. Says the Gemara, the Gemara says, I have another simple question to you. Why not feed them to the dogs? Let the dogs eat them. The answer is he sent them to the river. He wanted to publicize that a suffix drusa is a problem. So that's why he sent them to the river, because it was more of a public act, and he wanted to publicize his psak. Says the Gemara, why is he supposed to kill them? He didn't want to shech them. People will think that they were treif because he messed up the shechita. Was he going to shoot them? It's dumb. They just break their neck. They break the neck of the birds. Says the Gemara, there was a duck that Rav Ashi owned. Ol levene kanya nafik asa kimemasmes kuyadama. It went into the reeds, and when it came out of the reeds, it saw that its neck was red. Now, two options might have happened in the reeds. The reeds might have cut its neck, or there might have been an animal in the reeds that slashed its neck. So says the Gemara, Rav Ashi, Lo yamin safek kalva safek shuna emer kalva hakanami safek kani safek shuna emer kani mechuye. The same way we said before that if there's a suffix, whether it was a cat or a dog, we assume a dog did it and it's not a drusa. So to meaning, in other words, if you could explain it, if there's a plausible explanation of why it has those marks, then we're lenient. Over here, it's very possible the reeds cut its neck, and therefore it's not a drusa at all. Amdi b'nei Rav Chia, drusa sha'amru. This halacha of a drusa, it doesn't mean that it's treif. It just means tzricha bedika. You have to do bedika. By the way, the question is, why those birds? Why didn't he do bedika? That's the Mefarshim ask. Why didn't Shmuel shecht all those birds and do bedika? Right? You could do a bedika. It doesn't mean that it's treif. It just means it requires a bedika. So some Mefarshim say that birds, small birds, are very hard to do bedika. Bedika is much more plausible on a goat or a sheep or an ox. So the halacha is tzricha bedika. What part do you have to check? Keneged b'nei mayim. You have to check the belly. You have to check the belly of the animal and make sure there's no signs of poison. Rav Yosef, B'nei Rav Chia kvar pirsha de Shmuel. The truth is, this B'nei Rav Chia that you check the belly, I already heard this in the name of Shmuel earlier. Damar Shmuel Shem Rav Chanina ben Antignos, Drusa Sha'amr Tzich B'dika L'nei Mayim. You have to check the belly. The Gemara says, Boy Ilfa, Yesh Drusa L'Samanim, Ain Drusa L'Samanim. Let's say the animal gets clawed on the neck. is the poison able to penetrate the esophagus? In other words, the esophagus is harder than the stomach, so maybe the poison cannot penetrate the esophagus. So he says, Amrav Zera, Hadabai Ilfa Kvar Pirsha, Rav Chanan Barava. This Shail of Ilfa was already addressed by Rav Chanan Barava, Dam Rav Chanan Barava Marav. Drusa Shamr Tzichem B'dik Keneged Beisachol Kuloi. Rav's opinion is that not only do you have to check the belly of a drusa, you have to check the chest cavity as well, the ribs, all the entire cavity. Va'afilu b'simanim, and the same halachas apply by the pipes. In other words, if it was doiris by the neck, it could cause it to be a drusa. You have to check the neck to make sure there's no spots of poison. The point is, the drusa is there's no puncture. The drusa is you're looking for red spots. The point is, if the animal gets clawed, let's say over here, and you look inside, the esophagus is whole, the trachea is whole, you say, oh, it's kosher. No. You're now looking for spots of poison. That's the point. That's the difference. You're looking for spots of poison because those spots of poison will eventually penetrate. Says the Gemara, Bai Ilfa asks a question. Now, the only reason why these two Gemaras are over here is because it's the same flow. Ask the question, and the response is Kvar Pirsha. I already have the answer. Nidaldalu siman nidaldum bekama. We know that if the esophagus or trachea become dislocated, it's treif. How much of the esophagus or trachea have to be dislocated? Entirely, majority, minority. So he says, Amrav Zera hadabay ilfa Kvar Pirsha Rabbi Chana. I already have the answer. Rabbi Chana dam Rabbi Chana b'Shmuel. Siman shadal beruban. If roiv of the simanim are dislocated, it's a treif. By Ravashi, hamismasa mahu. Let me ask you a question. Let's say the animal gets clawed in the leg. I check the whole body. The rest of the body is good. The leg is decaying. There's clearly poison in the leg. What is the halacha? Do we say, meaning, you understand the kasha? There is definitely decaying in the body because of poison, but it's at parts of the body, it's different parts of the body. What's the halacha? So here's the rule. I'll just say it out, so we'll see it inside. Decaying of the flesh because of the drusa, what we do is we look as if like a doctor were to remove that flesh. Would it make, that's the halacha. So now you have to ask yourself, is removing that part of the body going to make it a treifa? If it's, let's say, part of the toe, no, that's fine. They don't have toes. You understand what I'm saying? Then it's fine. But if it's a part of the liver, if it's a part of the lungs, then it's a problem. You understand what I'm saying? So we look at the decaying flesh, we sort of look at it as if it's not there. And then you have to reevaluate, is the animal treifa if it's missing those parts? Says the Gemara, Amrav Zera, Hadabai Ravami Kvar Pirsha of Yehuda, Amrav Yehuda Marav. B'drusa achiyadim baser keneged b'nei mayim. When there's a drusa, what we're looking for redness of the flesh opposite of the stomach. So if there's redness, then it's a problem. But nismases, but let's say there's no redness, but there's parts of the body that are decaying. So then the halach is, royanoi sekilu einoi. We look at the decaying flesh as if it's not there. If those parts of the body that are missing would make it a treifa, then it's treif, and if not, not. The Gemara says, "Heichidami nismases." What's an example of nismases? What does it mean? What's the process? Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua, kol sharoif gardo mamidel basachai. The halacha is, if you would go to a doctor and you would show this decaying flesh, and they would remove it to try to save the body, that's the halacha. So we bring it to sort of look at like a vet, and we say, well, he would remove it. Then you have to ask yourself, would it make it a treifa? The Gemara has a story like this. Amr Vashi, Kavin Berev Kahana Aisi Kamani Rea. They brought a certain animal lung. That was decaying. So when it was lying flat against the floor, it looked good because against the floor it had gravity, so it looked all right. But if you were to lift it up, have it talcha v'nafla tilchi. Pieces would come off of the lungs. So in other words, it was decaying. The halacha is, what I just got finished telling you, we look at decaying as if it's missing. A missing part of the lungs is a treifa. So he says, based on the ruling that we just had, he made the animal a treifa. Just to finish up, right? If it was punctured by a needle, then it's only treif if it punctures the lungs. It goes through and through. But when the animal gets slashed, what you're looking for is spots of red opposite the stomach. Meaning, even if it's not on the actual stomach, but it's on the flesh opposite the stomach, that's enough to make it a treifa. Rav Zvid added the following: by opposite the stomach, opposite the intestines, if there's red spots, that's a treifa. But when it comes to the esophagus and trachea, it's not enough. Let me just show you on myself. I probably shouldn't put it up, but I don't care. This is the flesh that's outside of the esophagus or trachea. That's not the esophagus or trachea. Spots over there would not make it a treif. by the stomach, spots on the flesh pointing outside of the stomach is enough to make it a treif. The simanim, by the esophagus and trachea, the spots have to be on the esophagus and trachea themselves. Okay, just to finish up, Amra Papi, Boy Rav Bibi Barabaya, Veshet Nikuvasai Bimashu. We know that a esophagus is treif if it's punctured. Any puncture is treif. Drusasai, let's say there's a red spot. How big does the spot have to be? So it's very simple. If a puncture is bimashu, right? If a needle were to puncture the esophagus, what's the halacha? A mashu, it's treif. Then a mashu spot of a drusa, of poison, is also going to be treif. That's very obvious, because the poison is not going to be more lenient than a needle. But here's the shaila. A trachea, unlike an esophagus, is only treif if it's either cut roiv, or if it's missing a hole the size of a coin. I don't know if you remember this. So here's the shayla. Let's say a coin is 1 inch circle. By a poison, is it the same thing? Do we say that the circle of poison has to be 1 inch, or merely a spot, and we're more machmer by a drusa? Says the Gemara, by the trachea, it's treif if the puncture is the size of a coin, the isser coin. The question is, how big does the red spot have to be, indicating drusa, in order to opposite the trachea, in order to treif it up? So Pasha, after he asked the question, he answered, even a mashu is a problem. You say, why? I thought it's only a problem by a hole if it's the size of a coin. So how come the spot of poison? The answer is because that poison spot, it's going to spread and spread and spread, and it's going to destroy the entire animal. So a spot of poison is an indication of a much bigger problem than the spot itself. My taima, ziara mikla kalavazal, because that poison will spread and spread and spread until it decays the entire trachea. All right, we'll stop here.